Hello, board gamers of the world. Welcome to the Curious Box. One more Thursday, one more interview. This time we have a very special guest, and I'm trying to pronounce his name properly. Robert Geistlinger. He is very well known from you for sure. He's a collaborator of the Dice Tower, and he's also the marketing and sales responsible of the Arcane Wonders. We'll be here. He is already here, and he will be talking to us about this wonderful world of board games and his life surrounding it. Albert, welcome to the Curious Box.
Just for everyone at home, it's Geistlinger.
Geistlinger.
It's easiest to break it into two parts.
Okay, so where does your name come from?
So it's German, but as I've done research on it, it's actually Hungarian German. The original Geistlingers were actually German-Hungarian, then into Germany, then eventually out of Germany into the States. But it stayed Geistlinger the whole time. It's not one of those names that got changed when it got over here.
But you were born in the U.S., right?
I was born in the U.S., born just outside of Chicago.
Yeah. And you started playing board games when?
Well, let's see. So, I mean, this is probably familiar. As a kid, I played a good amount of, mass market games. Plus, we played a lot of card games. Probably way too many nights spent playing Rook and Rummy. But before that, during all of that, I played a lot of D&D. I always just had interest in making games. And then my mother, of all people, when I was probably, 11 or 12, brought home this game called Nightmare.
Yeah.
Folks in Europe might know the game as Atmosphere.
Atmosphere, yeah.
And I was obsessed with this game. Completely and utterly obsessed. Every time the guy got on the VHS, it was like, "You maggot." I loved everything. But it made me I was like, what else is there? And I had a friend in high school who also introduced me to Magic the Gathering, also introduced me to my still favorite board game of all time, Avalon Hill's Advanced Civilization. And Advanced Civilization is what I fault for making me realize that not only do I love strategy games, I love long strategy games.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that. What makes you love long strategy games?
I don't know. I just do. You tell me a game only takes a half hour, and I'm like, all right, cool. You tell me a game takes 7 hours to play, I'm like, so when are we playing? It's just, I think it's for me, I don't know, my brain it takes me at least a half hour to really start to grok the game. And so if it's a game that's short, well, by the time it hits, I'm like, well, I was just getting it. Because
go on.
I was going to say, because one thing that's actually interesting about me, and this is weird given that, I've done reviews with the Dice Tower, I make board games, I can't remember rules to games. Cannot remember them at all. Even the games I publish, I have to reread the rule books. So I also don't learn the rules to games very quickly. And I don't learn them normally by reading a rule book. I learn them by playing. And I think that's another reason why long games really do work for me, because I get time to learn the game over a time. And so by the time I finally, yes, I got all these rules, I need the game to still have some time ahead of it.
By the time you finish the game, you just...
Although I will say, now that I'm getting a little older, I do appreciate shorter, light games.
I was going to ask you, what's wrong with Dixit? Why do you hate it so much?
I don't like Dixit. That's actually a fact. I just don't. This is not my style of game. Give me Lisboa.
Oh, okay. So you like Vidal?
I do, except there is one Vital game that I don't like. And everyone always looks at me like, how can you not like that game? I don't like the Gallerist. And I think it's because the first time I played it, I could not grok it. And by the time we got to the end of it, I still was like, okay, we played that. I still have no idea how to play this game. And it soured me so much that when I finally learned how to play, I just could not enjoy it. And it's
You have
sad.
to
I
try it
know it's a
again.
well-loved game. It's such a well-loved game, but it just never resonated with me.
No,
Whereas Lisboa, I will play Lisboa all day long.
no, with the Gallerist, I played 2 rounds of the game and I gave up. But because I wasn't ready for at the time when I tried it, I wasn't ready for that kind of weight on games.
Right.
So I just gave up. I will try it in the future for sure. But yeah, Vital is strong. You know, he's now launching some fillers.
Yeah.
He's going to release a few based on his own games, Lisboa and the other ones I can remember now. One is out there already. Is Mercado,
Yeah.
which is from Lisboa,
Yeah.
and
Right.
there will come Bots Factory and a few others. The one from Kanban, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think it's the right time too. I mean, given the world we've been in for the last year, lighter games have actually done a lot better because most of us are only able to play with our families. And so we're not getting the time with our hardcore gamer friends that we used to. So games that are a little lighter but still have meat on them have really started to take hold. And I'm not sure in a post-pandemic world that's going to change much either. I think those lighter games are really going to be strong.
I think it might take some time. I think maybe, but I think we'll get back to the heavier games. But which leads me
Well,
to
I
the
hope
next,
so.
which leads me to the next question: how are you surviving the pandemic? I mean, you are a heavy gamer. Do you have heavy gamers at home?
So I have the benefit of the other half I live with is also a board game publisher, so I can still play heavy games. I have that benefit. Not everyone gets to live with another board game publisher in the house, so I am fortunate in that respect. So I'm surviving. Plus, I've adapted table. I spent a lot of time in Tabletop Simulator. Um, and so I've adapted, and honestly, not a lot changed for me in this world because I already worked remote. The only real major change for me in this has just been play testing has to be remote, and the fact that we're not having shows. Other than that, I'm doing okay. I'm not going to be getting any 17-hour games of Advanced Civilization anytime soon, but hey, something to look
When
forward to.
when did you start working on the industry?
So officially, I working as my actual job would have been 20. I want to say 2017, maybe 2018. That's when I joined. So officially, when I was in the industry per se, would have been when I started with Quartermaster Logistics. I was their sales rep for a while. And for those that don't know, Quartermaster Logistics does Kickstarter fulfillment for board games. They're the logistics arm of Cool Stuff Inc.
Yeah.
So
And
that's when I was officially as I received a paycheck. I mean, before that, I was already as a contributor and reviewer with the Dice Tower since 2016. Before that, I did some volunteer work working in the library at like Dice Tower Convention, things like that. And then I also had a few designers that just through random discussions and stuff, I was doing some play testing for games they hadn't even signed yet. For a while, I think Philip DeBerry was pretty much sending me every prototype he had to take a look at. So yeah, it helped that prior to getting in the industry, when I was just a gamer, I realized I loved making prototypes, but not just like prototypes of games that I was trying to design, prototypes for other people. I loved the construction process. And it became a running joke that I was probably one of the few people who could probably 90% counterfeit a board game in his house if he wanted to. I got real good at that. Not counterfeiting, obviously, just crafting cards and things like that.
You like spending you like spending time crafting cards and stuff like that.
I do. I have a printer that will take actual 310 GSM clay coated stock and print front and back, and I like cutting them. And I'm a crazy wackadoodle person who, like, even though I own like a machine that will do it, I still hand cut them and hand punch every corner with this little, I don't know, what does this cost me, $7? And everyone's like, well, why? You have a machine that does that. And I'm like, yeah, but it's therapeutic to just sit here and next. I think this thing has probably rounded the corners of close to 10,000 cards.
Oh, I hope designers send you the prototype already done. Or right now.
Some did, some didn't. Now people do, but
how did you become a collaborator on the Dice Tower? I mean, because I'm asking you this because it's probably your face is most recognizable from those videos, yeah.
So that was a very short jump, actually. I had been tooling around with the idea that I wanted to do reviews, because at that point I owned, I think my collection had grown to around 1,500 games at that time. And I was living alone, and I was like, I've got all this time on my hands. And at the time I was still working in the auto industry, but I was also working from home doing that. And I was like, I'm going to do reviews. So I was going to review Terraforming Mars. It had just come out, or was about to come out, and I was like, I'm going to review Terraforming Mars. And I kept like recording all sorts of ridiculous stuff. I think at one point I was going to have a whiteboard behind me where, like, I was doing this on my phone. And then I got a little better camera, and then Rob Oren, who also was a contributor on the Dice Tower at the time and still does his own channel. On his channel, he started doing a thing called community review, where he would like say, okay, we're going to talk about Descent, and we're going to talk about Arkham Horror, and send in a little clip. And I started doing that. And at first it was just me like, I don't know what I'm doing. I love Descent, right? And by the time I got to Arkham Horror, I was like, well, what if I did a green screen and did some silly stuff? And so during the process of that, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do skits. So I did 3 reviews. I think I don't remember what the first one was, but I know I did At the Gates of Loyang. I did, I can't remember, the game from Matago that has the Irish theme. I can't for the life of me remember the name of it. Starts with an I. I'll remember it at some point. But I did that where I was like in the board. And then I did Lost in Rillier, a little card game from Atlas. And I had posted a link to that. Now it's on the Blue Player. So that was my 3rd video. I posted a link to that on Facebook. And Tom Vassell and I were already friends on Facebook from years. And Tom just messages me and goes, give me a call. I'm like, okay. And he called me and he asked me if I wanted to join the Dice Tower, have my videos be on there. And I actually struggled with it. It wasn't like an automatic. I went, let me think about it, because I was just starting out the Blue Player channel. And I was like, well, I either get absorbed into the Dice Tower, which would give me recognition right away and give me a wider audience, but at the same time would be giving up some of that identity that I was wanting to create. But after a couple weeks, I weighed the pros and cons, and I went, yep, let's do this. So Lost in Rillier, I redid slightly and put that on the channel, and I did the skits. I think it was the skits, honestly, that he loved. Because I think in the Lost and Really video, I'm arguing with myself in the beginning. And so from there, I just kept doing reviews on the channel. So I came in directly as a reviewer. I wasn't a contributor on any of the shows. And I kept doing the skits until I think the last one I did, I want to say it was for the Labyrinth board game based on the movie that sadly is one of my favorite movies and sadly one of my most hated board games. But I started the skit where, you remind me of the babe. And then the album was like, what babe? And then I'm like, nope, we're not doing this. Because I was like, I'm not doing this skit. And I don't think I ever did another skit. After that, I went serious. And that's when I started wearing the suits. And I just went, this is serious. And it became a running joke because Roy Canada is so, wow, great, wild. And I'm so, here's a shirt, tie. And we were like this diametrically opposed thing. It was, and he's so like Ameritrash games, and I'm so. Is the game about spice trading in the Mediterranean? And so it kind of became a thing. And then Tom mentioned that he wanted to start a show, a bi-weekly show about Kickstarters. And I think it was the first person was like, I have an idea. I'll do a mini version of my reviews for a Kickstarter, like a little 2-minute. I'll do a 1-minute overview. And I called it, Hey, What's Funding? Because it was literally the first thing that popped into my head. And so the first episode of that, you see me, I would just like walk onto camera and be like, hey, what's funding? It was the stupidest thing. But I kept doing it. And funny story about that is at the time, no one was sending me prototypes of Kickstarters. That just wasn't happening because I was just starting that. And I was known for doing reviews of full games. So I would actually go out onto Kickstarter and look for games that offered a print and play option. And I would, every 2 weeks, download the files, craft a copy of the game, play the game, film the game, it went up on the segment, and then I started the process all over again. Every 2 weeks. Like it was, and I believe I do know I'm the only original contributor from the first episode of that. Because originally it was me and most of the contributors from Canada. And they all dropped off, and then eventually Mark joined. So over time, I was like, I can't keep doing this. I cannot keep making a board game every 2 weeks, reviewing. I'm like, this is exhausting. So finally I put out a call. I'm like, hey, you got a Kickstarter and you want me to look at it, let me know. And this started getting a schedule. But as that happened, I realized I really needed something more catchy. So one day I was like, what if I just called the show FOMO? Like, that makes sense. Yeah. Like, FOMO is a big part of Kickstarter. And sure enough, the first time I switched over to the FOMO format, suddenly the next convention, everybody's going to be, hey, FOMO! And I was like, all right, that's what I am now. I'm the FOMO guy. And now it's nice because publishers will reach out to me sometimes 6 months in advance and be like, hey, we've got this game coming on Kickstarter. And I'll be like, all right, so send me a rule book, because my one rule of FOMO is it has to be something I genuinely want to look at. I don't want to do a FOMO about a game that I'm like, I hated this. Like, I mean, even especially because at the time FOMO was every 2 weeks. So it was really important to me that if I was only going to spotlight one game, it needed to be a game I genuinely had a fear of missing out on. Now that we've moved to weekly, I'm kind of like, all right, I'll look at things that I'm maybe lukewarm on, and maybe I'll find something I love. And then, of course, now I've started, so, obviously Kickstarter goes through spurts. Sometimes we have 50 campaigns going on, and sometimes there's like 3 worth looking at. So I've started doing a fill-in called FOMO Rewind, where I actually start looking at old games as well, like where they're at in their process. So yeah, that's the story of FOMO. And then so I kept doing reviews on the channel, and then unfortunately when I switched over from Quartermaster to here at Arcane, I just don't have time to do full reviews anymore. Plus, on the channel, it also felt a little weird to me at that point doing full length reviews of other publishers' games. Um, it's fine. I want everyone to do well, and obviously, I still do FOMO for other publishers' games. I don't even do FOMOs for my own games. Um, but I was a little nervous, and I remember I was having a conversation with Stephen Bonacore, and it was like, because at the time I still doing, he's like, I wouldn't do it if I was you. And I'm like, I mean, he's like, you're gonna look weird the first time like let's say you hit another labyrinth and you talk about how bad it is. That's not gonna bode well. And between that and just time, I decided it was time to stop doing full reviews. Can't say that I won't ever do them again, but for now, I'm just gonna stick with FOMO.
In general, I mean, there is this debate online about reviewers and people who talk about games in general on YouTube. That they never say they don't like a game. I mean, unless you work. Unless you are Tom Vessel or Z Garcia or someone like this. In general,
Well,
people always say they like the game in some way, and they seem, according to the critics, they seem not to point out the negative sides of the games. What do you
right.
think about this?
Well, so as someone who has done negative reviews, such as the game Capere that I believe I just trashed on camera because it was bad. I'm sorry. And also, there was a game that I'm not even going to state its name because it doesn't need any more press. That was a straight ripoff of another game, and I called it out. But when it comes to negative reviews, I look at something like when I covered Labyrinth. I do think Labyrinth was a cash grab. I did not enjoy the game. Beautiful minis. Johnny did an amazing job sculpting those minis. But I have the opinion of if the game's bad, as a reviewer, it's bad for me. I kind of have the opinion that every game that gets published, it got published because somebody liked it. Whether I look at the game and I'm like, I absolutely can't stand anything about this. So I always looked at it as I would state, this is not a game for me. This is what I don't like about it. But I would always try to find one or two little things that I thought, well, if you like this sort of thing, maybe this is worth looking at. So I'm not opposed to negative reviews at all. But as long as they're framed within the framework of that's my opinion. Because again, to me, a reviewer is not supposed to be looking at as a publisher, I look at a game and I think, is this objectively good or bad? And I have criteria for that. But as a reviewer, I'm looking, is the game objectively good or bad for me? And the reason that's important is because the people who watch my reviews or are drawn to my reviews were drawn to it because the style of games that I tend to prefer, they also tend to prefer. So if I say the game's objectively bad for me, then it might be objectively bad for that person. But rando person who just happened upon my review and has never seen one of mine, I needed to also give them some reason, the reasons why it might be okay for them. I mean, we all have reviewers we gravitate towards. For me, before I became a reviewer, Ryan Metzler was the guy that I most connected with. Like, if Ryan Metzler liked a game, I could almost guarantee I was going to love that game. If Ryan Metzler hated a game, I could almost guarantee I was going to hate that game. Meanwhile, Tom was off or on. Like, I liked the fact that he would give me objectively, but I wasn't sure. Just because he disliked a game didn't necessarily mean I was going to dislike that game. So I think that's the important part, is if you're doing the reviews negatively but keeping it objective, it's negative for me personally, and not just flat out saying this is the worst piece of garbage ever made, no one should ever own it. That's where I get a little weird about it. But at the same time, there's some entertainment value in that. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and say there isn't.
And that
And
there
at the
might
end of the
be.
day, the YouTube algorithm doesn't care either way where the interaction came from. I don't think, but just to answer, I don't think reviewers should be afraid to say that a game is bad. Just don't say it's bad for the sake of saying it's bad. But if you honestly think I didn't like this game, or I think this is broken, you should absolutely say it. And don't just sugarcoat the whole thing, because at the end of the day, if you sugarcoat it, long term, that's no good for you. Because if you sugarcoat and you want to say it's all great, what will happen is people who connected with you are going to buy that game. And then if they shared your real opinion that that game's garbage, they're going to be less trusting of you because you told them the game was good.
Yeah, exactly. What? How would you define a bad game?
Well, there is no definition of a bad game just because of what I just said. It's objective. Now, there is one thing that will slot in a bad game. It's broken. Like a game that is absolutely broken, that's a bad game. But that's a bad design. Beyond that, I mean, then it becomes objective. For me, a bad game is a game that is shocking for the sake of being shocking, or too quote unquote adult. That's a bad game for me. I don't want to play that. A game, I will say there are some times where I'm like, this was a great game if you'd cut it in half. You put too much in there. Every game's different. Objectively, I know what's a bad game for me, but I don't know what's a bad game for you.
Of course. That's why I asked your opinion about it, because I think exactly the same. It's a subjective thing. A bad game.
I mean, I will say, I'll say right here, I'll say right now, like if they and someone else learned recently, if a game is too heavily weighs on its narrative element, where the players are really making the game more than the mechanisms, that's objectively a bad game for me personally, because I care more about the mechanics of the game. And if I have to start making the narrative, I check out. And now it's objectively a bad game. And not only does it become a bad game for me, it becomes a bad game for anyone playing it with me because I'm so bad at it.
What attracts you on a game immediately, besides Mediterranean exchanging
spice training in the Mediterranean?
Yeah, exactly.
Wooden cubes. This is exactly what Mark Street and Roy would tell you, is that if it has spice trading in the Mediterranean or cubes, I'm immediately in. But honestly, what will immediately attract me these days to a game is something with beautiful art, table presence. I'm honestly very attracted these days to games with more of a toy factor. That's why the first time when I saw Four Gardens and I saw that big pagoda, I was like, I have to know what this is right now. What is it? I need to know. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, what attracts me is going to be a heavier, something that I don't really know how to explain it. It's not really I know it when I see it, sort of thing. Like, I mean, if you were showing me Azul's pretty cool. But if you were showing me Azul next to Madeira, I'm much more attracted to Madeira. So,
yeah.
I don't
know. What do you do exactly on Arcane Wonders? Because that's what you were doing professionally. I mean, it's your main job, your day job.
It is my day job. So I am the director of sales and marketing here. So day to day, that means mostly I deal with distribution, retailers, finding out from my production team where things are so I can roll out release schedules on games. But then also the marketing side, I also hand out rollout of our marketing plans. I handle our social media. These days it's making TikTok videos. Not even kidding. So yeah, my day-to-day, but beyond that, because as any board game publisher these days, I also have to do a lot of other things. I handle talking with designers who want to pitch us games. I help play testing and some dev work. I implement all of our virtual tabletop simulator stuff. I also these days I'm redesigning our website. But at the end of the day, what my primary role is managing our sales through our distribution, direct sales, conventions, and then handling the marketing rollouts. Those are my primary roles.
And you still have time to play games?
Yeah, sometimes.
I mean, because I should
you're
point
not.
this out. Okay, Robert works on Arcane Wonders and he collaborates with the Dice Tower, and he also does some videos for his own channel, and so on and so on. He does a lot of things. I don't understand. Do you have 35 hours a day?
You can make 35 hours a day if you really work at it. No, you're not wrong. I don't get as much time as I used to play games for fun's sake. And that really even was before I got here at Arcane. When I was doing reviews more regularly, there were often times I used to actually tell people this, and they're like, I want to get into board game reviews. And I'm like, well, the first thing I need you to ask you is, do you enjoy playing games solely for fun? And they're like, yes. I'm like, then maybe you don't want to do reviews, because what's going to happen is you're going to play a game for a review. You're going to play it once, you're going to play it twice, you're going to play it 3 times, right? And you're going to be analyzing the game the whole time. So you're not going to be playing for winning. You're going to be playing for taking apart the game. Now, the last one you'll probably play just to win. And then after that, you're going to do a video for it. And then the next time you play that game will probably be never. Because you've moved on to the next thing. Reviewers are the worst at getting caught up in the cult of the new, and it's not because, ooh, new shiny, it's because, oh, I need to do a video for this. This game's hot right now, or no one's covered this game. I need to get this game played. And then you sit there and you stare longingly at Lisboa and go, oh, I really wish I had time to play Lisboa, but I've already done a video on it. And so now it's just compounded, because like for this week, I've got 4 games I have to get played this week, but they're all games that one of them is for playtesting internally, and 3 of them are for evaluating for picking up for publishing. I'm probably not going to have time to play anything for fun this week.
Okay. What would be some mistake? I mean, you're dealing with game designers all the time. What would be some mistake that you think game designers, especially unexperienced game designers, they do while pitching a game?
Well, so experienced board game designers normally don't make many mistakes pitching. I'll be honest with you. They've been through the process enough times. They know the right things, and they know not to embellish the whole thing. Mistakes I see made are comparing your game to some other hot game. Don't do it. Never do it. Leave that for me. If you come in and you tell a publisher, this game is like a replacement for Catan, I've checked out. I've not listened to a word you've said after that. Wait and let me do it. If you really think your game is gonna make Catan irrelevant, which it's not, but if you really think it is, let me take a look at it and play, and wait for me to say that. So yes, comparing your game, getting to this one happens a lot. And actually, there are some experienced game designers who actually are guilty of this occasionally. getting way too caught up in telling me the entire narrative story and backstory of your game. You have a small window with me. Do not spend it telling me about how when you were 12, you came up like this. And that's fine. You can tell me that part. But then 30 minutes later, you're now telling me how this character in your game went on to. And I'm like, okay, but what's the game about? Because I'd really like to know. And then, in the current world we're in, absolutely make a short video. Send me a short video. Like, just show me how the game works. But the biggest mistake is when people come in over embellishing what their game is or what they think their game is instead of telling me what their game actually is.
And as a person who reads lots of rule books are a problem. They've
Yes, they
always
are.
been, and probably they will always be, and that's why YouTube channels exist, or one of the reasons why. Um, what do you think? Why do you think it's so hard to create a good rule book? And what makes a good rule book actually?
Well, why it's hard to make a good rule book is, that's a great question. I'm not really sure because the problem is so there are times I think we have a great rule book and I'll be like, yes, anyone can learn from this. And then we'll send it to a couple other people and they'll be like, yeah, this is great. And then we'll send it out in the world and people will be like, I have no idea how to learn the game from your book. So the first problem is we tend to make the rule books and objectively as a publisher look at a rule book with an innate understanding of the game already. So that already hinders our ability to make a good rule book because and that's why blind playtesting is so important. It's just, I give you a rule book, you figure it out. But the problem there, people will say blind playtest. The problem that is the majority of people you get who are willing to do playtesting and blind playtesting are your alpha gamers. They're your more hardcore gamers. They're going to be more able to figure out that rule book, even if it's bad. I've been saying internally here, I'm like, if I take a rule book, I should be able to send it to my mother. And if she can't tell me what it means, we're not doing a good job with this. But I also, on the flip side of that, I will say rulebooks haven't gotten worse. They've gotten better. Rulebooks have absolutely gotten better. What I think has changed is people's perception of what a rulebook should do. And I think a lot of that has to do with because of the way things shifted in the video game world. I remember being a kid, getting a Nintendo game. When I picked up Contra came with a manual of how to play Contra. Contra, when I loaded it up, did not tell me how to play that game. I read a book. But video games shifted to where you don't get manuals with video games. You get a tutorial that handholds you through it. And in a lot of ways, a regular rule book is that old manual you got with your copy of Contra. Now, there are those quick start guides. Like we have a quick start guide for the Hello Neighbor game that is more like that tutorial. So I think quick start guides have gotten better. Rulebooks have gotten better. But I think people's perception of what a rulebook should do has also changed. And unfortunately, we haven't changed as fast as people's perception. Now, obviously, the things that make a rulebook bad, and I have blasted several projects I've covered on FOMO for this, is when you put a rulebook out of order. If I'm having to flip back and forth to reference things, if you are how to play and you're giving me part of it, then suddenly you're introducing me to 5 pages of concepts, then you resume how to play, that's a problem. Either put your concepts at the end in an index or put them at the start. Like, ordering of a rule book can kill an otherwise good rule book.
What?
That's really a hard part. And also not putting enough people like pictures. Sorry, not enough. I may have grown up on rulebooks that were like see section 1A paragraph 13B, but ain't nobody trying to learn a game like that anymore. Like, can you imagine a modern gamer looking at the rule book for Avalon Hill games and going, huh? So rule books have gotten better, but people's expectation of rule books have gone ahead of that.
Do you think rule books, I mean, physical rule books, they should have QR codes on some rules to guide you directly to a video or something like that?
They absolutely should, which is why I'm a big supporter of things like Watch It Played. Back when I still was doing the Blue Player actively, I did animated how to plays for Kickstarters, which actually made me really realize the way a rulebook, because often I did those. I had most every one of those animated how to plays you see over there. I never played the game. I didn't even have a copy of the game. I had a copy of the rule book and a folder of assets. And I made the video from a rule book. The rule book was my script. So no, actually, Watch It Played, all that. I've been a big supporter of Dized, the app Dized. We actually, for Hello Neighbor, there is a tutorial that will handhold you through the entire game. It'll lead you through setting up. It'll ask you how many players, what cards you need, what keys, and actually take you through votes, like everything for that first play. You never need to look at the rule book at all. And that's a fully animated tutorial that I also did that one too. But Dized is fantastic, and I'm hoping we see more of that. And then also, yes, things like Rodney Smith, things like that. Paul Grogan is a master of teaching games. Him and Jonathan Cox from John Gets Games, both of them are just fantastic. Unfortunately, as a publisher, they also tend to have very long backlogs. So sometimes I'm like, I really want a video for this. And they're like, well, I'm booked up till November. And I'm like, but it's January. So there is a case. And actually, that if anyone's watching this and they're like, man, I really want to get into do videos, do how to plays. Do how to set up and how to plays. Because we need more of those. We need a lot more of those. And honestly, and if you want to get into this and try to make some money, that's content as publishers will pay for. We will happily pay you to do a how to play. Okay,
guys, free advice, contact Martin Wonders. if you know how to play, then
no. So I've done that, and I'm actually I have a unique perspective, being that I also was and am still content creation too. I've got to be one of the only publishers who, after, like during a Kickstarter, like I'll reach out to content creators and be like, hey, I want you to do an overview preview for me or something like that. And they'll give me back how much it's going to cost. And I'll be like, are you kidding me? You should be charging twice that. I'm not paying that little. Here's an actual amount you should be charging. And they're always like, did you just tell me that you won't charge me that little? I'm like, yes, because you are worth the time. I know how long it takes for you to do this. If I extrapolate how long I think it's going to take you to do this, you're basically telling me to pay you like $2 an hour. That's not going to happen. I will not let content creators undercharge for them, which is weird. Because I undercharged. I undersold myself. When I did those animated how to plays, I did them for peanuts. And for example, the one I did for Mezzo is a pretty complex game to only have a rule book. And I bet you I spent 60 hours animating that thing. And all total, I will tell you that I charged less than 3 digits. I basically made like 50 cents an hour. So I am well versed in what undervaluing yourself means. And so I'm telling you right now, you value your time. Your time is worth. Well, so what it for me it was I came from the auto industry and I was so used to gauging pricing more based on the end product, right? It wasn't about the time it took to get the product. It was this is what the end product's worth. So when I moved into this sphere, I was like, well, so this video is 7 minutes long. That can't be worth more than 50, $60, right? And they're like, yeah, but what about the 30 hours it took you to make it? And I'm like, well, that time. Oh, now I get it.
That's a common
But I
mistake.
didn't. But I didn't for the longest time. And so now I make it my point to yell at other content creators when they try to tell me that, they're going to do me a 10-minute or a 20-minute playthrough of my game and they're going to charge me $100. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're going to charge more than that. Thanks.
I think maybe they are not sure of the value of their of the quality of their service sometimes, especially if they are new doing videos. It might happen. But I think
It's fair, but
it's a very common mistake when you're starting to do something professionally to undervalue yourself.
it is. And there is some intrinsic value in what your audience is. But that's for me as the person contracting you to decide that from. Like, one of the best things I always tell content creators when they're reaching out to me, don't put it in my court. I love when content creators just give me a sheet that says, here's the kind of content I do, here's the cost. Because 9 times out of 10, I'll be like, great, I want this, this, and this. Let's do this. Whereas if you're like, well, what do you want? And I'm like, you're losing me here. Just tell me what it is and move on. I'll look at your metrics, I'll look at your stats, and I'll decide if you're worth it. But you need to price it at the price you think it's worth.
Great.
I really, yeah. You don't get there is a degree in this of, like, again, I'm somebody who started through the Dice Tower. I literally got paid in exposure for all of those, and that was worth it. But there's no way now I would accept being paid in exposure. Like,
for obvious reasons. Do you feel FOMO?
Yes, I do. People ask me that a lot too. They're like, well, people send you things. And I'm like, that doesn't mean I don't feel FOMO. One of my favorite things to cover on FOMO is games that I legitimately am worried won't get funded. And they're always games that I'm like, there was a game, I can't remember the name of it now, and I don't think it got funded. But I remember it was about Moby Dick and it had cards, and you were on the ships. And I adored this, and I knew that if this didn't get funded, this game was never going to happen. And yeah, I had FOMO. But I get FOMO about big games too. I'll be honest, like, after this, I'm going to be filming my FOMO for the Terraforming Mars Ares expedition. I have FOMO. I mean, granted, I have a prototype here, but I have FOMO about that because, honestly, spoil my FOMO for tomorrow, but it's better. It's absolutely better than the original Terraforming Mars, and I have to have it.
You think it's better? You think it's better than the original?
I think it's the game Terraforming Mars should have been. I cannot see a world that I will pull the original Terraforming Mars back out with that in existence. It is a better game. But I also get FOMO about stuff like exclusives and, so I own everything that has ever been made for Arkham Horror. Not the new 3rd edition, but 2nd edition. I own all the Arkham Knights promos. I own all the pre-painted minis. I hunted this stuff down. I definitely get FOMO. I like to joke that my copy of Terra Mystica, I bought Terra Mystica when it was completely out of print, and I spent $150 on that copy of Terra Mystica. only for it to come back in print 3 months later. Yes, I have FOMO. I have FOMO a lot. And you wouldn't think a guy who has 3,500 board games in his house would feel FOMO. But I do.
3,500.
I have 3,500 board games. Plus now, I mean, that was last count, which was like 7-8 months ago. And I think we were joking the other day that it's what, March 2nd now, and we were so it's March 2nd, and I've already purchased, I think, about 40 games this year.
40 games.
That's the thing no one knows. When I was doing reviews, still full-time Dice Tower, I bought all those games. No one ever sent me anything for a review. No matter how many reviews I did on Dice Tower, no one sent me free stuff. So when I was disappointed in a game, it was real disappointment because I spent real money. But what other people don't know,
I think Tom was getting your packages, and he was like, "Okay, Robert, it's mine. It's mine."
Right. Well, what people don't know is early on, I would actually buy games that I already knew I wouldn't like. Because I wanted people to have a reason to come check out my reviews early. And the way I did that, and this is another thing I tell people you can do, I would find games that, were for sale, they're newer games, but would have no reviews. Because again, as we said earlier, there are lots of people, reviewers, who don't want to do negative reviews. So if they don't like something, they just don't review it. So I would find games that there were no reviews for. And I'll be like, I know I'm going to dislike this game. I know it. It's going to be awful. But here's $60 so I can review it. My review for Widower's Wood. I bought Widower's Wood knowing fully well that I was not going to like that game. I spent $60 to tell everyone that I didn't like that game.
You still have it? You still have it?
No, that's probably one of the very few games I gave away. I gave that game to Vernon Piper.
You hated him
because he wanted to play the miniatures painter. I gave him that one. I don't give too many games. I think the only other game I ever give away is I have given away Ice Cool like 12 times. Because every time I pull it out to play, it's always with somebody I know who has kids. And they play it and their kids love it. And I'm like, well, this is yours now. And then I have to go buy another copy.
Well, that happens a lot, especially when you're showing up some games.
I've also, during this pandemic, on Amazon, ordered probably another 12 copies of Ice Cool to send out to friends who have kids all over the country. They're always like, what's some good suggestions? I'm like, you got to get Ice Cool.
Yeah, that happened to me with this one here, Café.
Which one?
Café. Yeah, I recommended it to so many people that I believe the game is out of print now. I believe it's because of me. That is my
it happens. It definitely happens. I mean, I actually got that way with one of our own games, Air, Land, and Sea. I kept getting a copy for, back here, and then I would end up keep giving people that copy, and I have to order another copy. Eventually, I ordered a giant box, a case of them to sit here, and I still ran out. So I just had to order another case. I love giving away games. Probably a little too much as a publisher sometimes. I do more giveaways than I probably should, especially over on our Discord. I kind of handed off someone, but every week or so, I'm like, nudge, nudge, we should give a game away. Give something away.
I'll make sure that I get your that you get my address after the interview.
Well, that was a little tougher. Getting overseas giveaways is getting tougher, especially with the new changes in VAT laws. It's hurting us as publishers here in the States. For Arcane, we made the decision that for Foundations of Rome and Freedom 5, we would eat it. We would take it on, but of course, for future Kickstarters, that's something we're going to have to evaluate. unfortunately, those loopholes just aren't there anymore. And now they want us to charge sales tax.
Yeah.
Basically, it's going to be a tough world for us as publishers, between the VAT changes in the EU and the UK, between the cost of wood pulp has gone up in China. I have a feeling this time next year, games that you right now are like a $40 MSRP, we're going to probably be looking at those being more $50. We're finally going to see a shift in that.
Games are
And as a
getting more
publisher,
and more
it's not
expensive
great.
every year.
Well, so they are, but that's why, like, one of my initiatives when I got here, because obviously, in this weird everything's glued together, Arcane Wonders also publishes the Dice Tower Essentials line. So it was a natural fit for me to come here. But one of the first things that I said here is like, so because we had just, when I got here, Dragon Scales had just come out in that line. Smartphone Inc. was coming, and these were games that were $60 MSRP US. And I'm like, that's a little high for an Essentials. Now I got, Smartphone, not exactly a family game, so that's fine. But one of the initiatives I stated when I got here is going forward, Dice Tower Essentials that are family games. Four Gardens coming out, things like that. I'm like, they need to be $40. Like, that needs to be their price point, and it's super important to me. I mean, so much so that we're reissuing Viral, and I'm bringing it down to $40 because I think that is a great price point for families. If you got a family of four, $40 is a good price point for a game that you can play together. When you start 50, 60, well, now, especially in the current economies, you have to make tough decisions. You're not gonna play a board game, and board games are a great way to spend time with your family. As someone who has fond, despite the bad sides too, has fond memories of playing Rook and Monopoly and Sorry and Nightmare with my family. I think it's important, and I think that's one thing all of this has taught us, is that spending that kind of time together is important. And I want to make sure that it stays accessible.
Yeah, that's important.
I mean, it's one thing. Freedom 5, that's a big, massive thing, and it appeals to a certain kind of gamer. That's why Foundations of Rome. Yes, it is a massive game, and it has a high price point. But that one, I was like, but one thing we don't have is we don't have a family game that also is epic looking. Family games tend to be chintzier looking sometimes. So I was like, I also want family games that are epic, but still you can learn. But that's why once that does, we eventually will have a Foundations. Now, it won't be Rome, but we'll have another Foundations that won't have the miniatures or anything. It'll be a base version, but it'll be more accessible to families.
Do you think after this pandemic is over, there will be more people playing games on a weekly basis? I mean, there will be more gamers because people had to stay at home and they played more games. Okay, so that's one of the things the future will tell us. But I was going to ask you in general, besides this and besides games getting more expensive, how do you see the near future of board games? Also, concerning the mixing it with the digital.
All right. Well, so future-wise, this past year we've seen a huge uptick in smaller games, two-player games, and if you keep an eye on TikTok, you'll find there is a whole, whatever's happened in the last year, there's been a whole new wave of gamers coming in the gateway sense. Like I'll engage with people over there who they maybe have bought their first or second game during this pandemic, and now they're hooked. So absolutely, post this, we're going to see more board games. What I'm really hoping is that's going to see more people in this post world visiting their local game stores, or more board game cafes doing well again. Um, so I think retail might see a resurgence on that. I think there might be a rubber band effect, and like for the first little bit, people might be like, "All right, I've had enough. I'm going outside and doing other things." But I think that love that they got. Look, no one's going to be making sourdough bread when this thing's over. Everyone's over that. But I think a lot of people, they discovered the board games during this, and it had a positive effect for us. And we will see a lot more people playing board games. But I think that it means we're going to see a lot more of those gateway style games taking off more than they were. Like, we had kind of been getting away from that the last couple of years, and I think we're going to push back into that for a little bit. As far as board games and digital apps, so I am definitely somebody who was very opposed to it at first. I will not, like, I was like, no, I don't want to pull out my phone during a board game. But I've come around. I have come around. So stuff like, Descent, and even though I still prefer first edition, second edition Mansions of Madness, those finally made me realize an app could be beneficial. And then also just being able to play with folks digitally like that. But as far as integration, I'm for it now. We've got a game that we're looking at that doesn't require, and you can play without it, but it lets you take a picture at the end, and your score is based on that picture. And the first time I played it, I was like, that's so cool. And so I've embraced this whole technology thing with board games. I think it's bridging a divide that, yes, there's going to be some old folks like me who are going to be no. But let's be honest. If you look at a game like Descent, second edition, that game is much more enjoyable because of the app. Descent first edition is a slog. Mansions of Madness. I love Mansions of Madness first edition. But it's a slog, which is why prior to second edition, I had never gotten to play that game as an investigator, ever. I always had to be the keeper because no one wanted to do all of that.
Yeah.
And the app took that away, and I finally got to enjoy Mansions of Madness as a regular player in the game, and it was magical. So I love apps and digital when they enhance. I still have a degree of weirdness, in the back of my brain with something like a Mansions of Madness, where you can't play it without the app, because I worry about the future in terms of, well, will the app continue to be supported, things like that. But beyond that, I love it. Also, what is Escape Tales?
Escape Tales, yeah.
Escape Tales, where there's the website that you used for the puzzles. I love the way that's done. And honestly, if it didn't have that, the game would still be, you could make it playable. But if I was wrong, it would be weirder because it would just tell me. Whereas this way, I can punch in and it's like, nope, sorry, and you go back. That layer would be lost without. So I think what's cool about the digital side of things is it's allowing us to bring things into the board game that were completely out of reach before. There were ideas we had that there was just no way to implement in any sort of real world way without basically having a player sit here and basically be the app. I mean, if you look at D&D, for better or worse, the DM really is the app. So if we can now let everyone be a player, I'm for it. I'm all for it. We can do things that we couldn't do before. Now, I am still a little weird about like completely playing a board game online or in a digital form with people. I'd rather sit and play it with humans at a table. but it's the world we're in right now.
Yeah, we gotta wait
So
for
we've
better
adapted.
news. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But they're, like, as Roy will tell you, I love my cubes. And picking up cubes with a mouse is not as satisfying.
You gotta touch them. You gotta touch those cubes.
Right. Like, for me, the reason I chose board gaming is I prefer a tactile thing. I
No,
need to
no, no.
touch something for it to
It's
be
because you
real.
love cubes, and you have always loved
It is.
cubes all your
That's
life.
it. It's because I love cubes.
You have an obsession with cubes.
I do. It's a little known fact. I actually take a bath in a bathtub full of cubes. I don't do that.
Robert, thanks a lot for being at the Curious Box for this time, talking a little bit, sharing your vision about how this board games world works, and your vision also about the future of board gaming. Thanks for the time. I know you have a tight schedule, and it's not that easy to get you. Thanks a lot. So,
Thank you
guys,
for having me.
thank you all for being there. Also, this was Robert Geistlinger. Geistlinger. Yeah,
Geistlinger.
yeah, more or less. And he was with us for our weekly interview. Every Thursday, 11 a.m. Or you can check them. You can check it later here at the Curious Box. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to receive all the videos from me from here. Thanks a lot. I hope I will see you at a table close to you.